want to make friends with the cow desperately. I don't have a cow. It's so disappointing.
There's one across the street from me if you want to borrow. It's not mine, but it...
Thanks. That's so helpful right now.
Raising a well-behaved child in this world requires strict discipline and punishment. Today, we will look...
No, we will not.
Hello and welcome to Childproof, a Pleasant Phantom production. I'm Tori Phantom.
And I'm Gwenna Laithland, and this episode is a super special episode of Childproof. It's our first ever crossover episode.
What?
And it's our big announcement that we have been rambling about for weeks.
Crossover announcement? I had no idea this was coming. I'm shocked. So surprised. Who are we collabing with for this super special episode of Childproof?
Ourselves.
What? This episode of Childproof is actually like 3 episodes in one because it's 3 podcasts. But it's just us. We're collabing with us.
With ourselves.
Yeah. So today we are discussing a book like we will be on Gwenna's new podcast, Bibliophage, featuring me.
This book takes place during the American Revolution, the primary subject of Tori's new podcast, Founded, featuring me.
Whoa. And the book is great for kids, which is why it's a childproof episode. So you'll get a little taste of all 3 podcasts.
And since this is a super special crossover episode debuting the 2 new podcasts on the Pleasant Phantom Production network, there is no timer. You get a timerless episode on this episode of Childproof, which you guys always are really excited about.
Yeah, and that's because we can't even try to time ourselves.
This one is probably going to be a little longer.
We're just going to talk and talk and talk because we're talking about books and history.
All the same time. So the book we are going to be discussing is Rebellion 1776 by Laurie Halse Anderson.
1776.
And we'll get to that in a sec. But before we get to talking about the American Revolution history and the book, I know this answer, but I'm going to pretend like I don't and ask you anyway. Do you pre-read books for your children?
Depends on the book.
Yeah, that's depends on the child for me.
Yeah, same.
I don't think I've ever had to pre-read a book for Abby. First, she wasn't a huge reader. She's learned to enjoy reading now more as, an almost adult.
An almost adult,
I know. But I don't have to pre-read. I haven't needed to pre-read anything for her in such a long time. The girl child is not terribly sensitive right now. I don't think I'll have to pre-read a whole bunch for her. The boy child, though, he is going to need some heavy pre-reading because he tends to be a little more sensitive to some stuff.
Yeah. That's my eldest. I don't think I've ever pre-read anything. They've always been a big reader, but Warrior Cats.
Yeah, Warrior Cat
and
was
Wings
the
of
dragon
Fire.
one.
And now we're getting into more serious stuff, but we're a teenager.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Do your thing. But my youngest is still in those early chapter books, and she's not really sensitive unless you see like a common housefly will totally dysregulate that kid. But anything else, like she's good. Whereas my middleest is my sensitive little bean. And those sensitivities are kind of predictable for me at this point.
Yeah.
But certain books I am going to pre-read, and certain I'm like, yeah, you're good with that, right? Because I'll tell you, this book that we're going to talk about is a not yet for this kiddo.
Yeah. We call them later books in my family. I'm not saying you can never read this. There's nothing technically wrong with this, but I can kind of guess at what feelings this is going to give you.
Yeah.
I am aware of the possible questions that are going to pop up for you. And I don't think you are ready to discuss that yet. Because if you're old enough to ask, you're old enough for an answer. But I don't think you would not ask this question if you don't read this book because you won't
exactly
have thought of it yet.
Yes. We don't need to give the foundation for the question yet.
Not yet.
And
then there are other times that, like, the vocabulary for mine, I'm still looking at vocabulary. We don't have full language on board yet. We just learned some topics are just going to be a little more difficult.
Yeah.
And sometimes the depictions of how they describe stuff is like, that's too much. We're not there yet. So this is just going to go on the later list.
Right. And here's the thing is that this book is on the later list for my kiddo. And but it's interesting, right? Because this is my history buff kid. This is my kid who loves the history. The name of this book is Rebellion 1776. It is right up her alley. So why did I pre-read this one? Because my kid has access to all of the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales except for the Donner Party one.
No.
That
makes perfect sense.
I didn't even need to pre-read that one. I was like, we're just not going to do that one.
No, that one's not there yet.
We're good on that one. And that one depicts all the war things, including death and smallpox and all of these things. But it does it in a graphic novel style that is easier to digest. There is humor involved. Have there been parts of the books that we've had to discuss? Yes. But the reason I decided to pre-read Rebellion 1776 is because I know the author. Now, I loved Laurie Halse Anderson growing up, but if you've read Speak, you know that she does not shy away from very serious subject matter. And I reread Speak a couple years ago. You know, I love this author. And I also know that this is not a graphic novel. This is going to be like real stuff. And I was like, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it because I also just don't mind to read a book. So,
Right.
And I think it's an incredible book. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I think my kid will enjoy it. It's just, which we will get to. I can't tell you everything right now at the top of the episode as to why this is a later book for her. But there was certain things that I told you because I read the book before you. I finished it first and I was like, no, this is on a later list. And it took you probably till 3/4 of the way through the book you're probably wondering the whole time, why can't she read this?
Well, because I wasn't necessarily pre-reading for this book is well beyond, like, this isn't just on a later list. It's on we're not even going to bother with it for right now. Because I mean, my littles are in first grade. My oldest, she can pick up whatever book she wants now. It does not matter. I'm not going to say boo to a single book she picks up, whatever.
Right.
So I was not pre-reading this. I was reading this because we're starting 2 different podcasts about American history and books. And this was a really good way of, let's see if we can
book club it.
Let's book club this one.
See what happens.
I read it. So I went in knowing by the time I started reading this book, I already knew that this was later listed for the Phantom family. And Tori was like, I'm not going to tell you why. You're going to see it. I got to that part. I was like, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, there is nothing wrong with what happens in the book. It makes perfect sense. It's actually handled very, very eloquently. It's very graciously done. There is an on-page death that would be a little upsetting to this middle child.
The context of it is the reason
it's
why.
Not just that there is any on-page death. This particular on-page death.
And it's the character.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
it wouldn't go well. So I completely understand. Oh, that's why we're later listed. Got it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was deep into the book before we got there. I told somebody on the internets that I pre-read books and I will later list things. And someone's like, well, that's censorship. And I thought you didn't believe in censorship of books. I was like, I don't believe in censorship. I believe in discernment, though.
Right. Right. It's like, I think there is a different level because when we're parenting, we should not just let our children have access to everything all the time because
that's called permissive parenting and is kind of
It's
problematic.
totally against what we do here.
Boundaries are important. And kiddo, you're not ready for this death.
And here's the thing though too is with my kiddo, she knows that when I'm like, I don't know if this is for you yet, here's why. She trusts my judgment because she knows that I am always there for her feelings. And we talk about, she'll be like, well, I thought I was doing okay, but then this upset me. So maybe we're not ready for that like we thought we were. Because if you're doing good with your feelings, well, maybe we know this thing is going to change that.
Right.
And so we have those conversations.
The conversations that I've had with my oldest about, especially when we get to a book that had been later listed. And like I said, I didn't do it a whole lot with my oldest. She just wasn't huge into reading at a time when I really needed to be sort of cognizant of the titles that she was picking up. But on the occasion or two that she was like, I want to read this book. Let me, no, not yet. So on the occasions that I have had to later list a book from my oldest, which that didn't happen super duper often, because again, she just wasn't a big reader. I didn't have to later list a whole bunch of books. But on the occasion, I was always, so you can go up to this point, but at this point, this specific thing is going to happen. A person is going to die in a specific way. A person is going to get hurt, and it is described in a certain way that I don't think you're going to be super comfortable with. Mm-hmm. When we got to the point that we were looking at those later list books, and it was later, we had arrived at later, be like, the reason, do you remember why I said this had to be for later? And sometimes we'd have to discuss why, remind. And then I was like, okay, so that's still in this book. Later may have arrived, but that topic is still in this book. Yeah. Are you cool with it? And my daughter is like me. We don't like spoilers. And that made it a little difficult because sometimes the reason it got latered involved a spoiler, like knowing that there is this type of death or, you know, the dog dies. That's a spoiler. Mm-hmm. My daughter has rejected every single book that I latered because of a dog death, with the exception of Marley.
That's honestly so valid.
So, like, I totally respect that.
Yeah. And that's, I think,
and she's still to this day,
piece.
even though I no longer have to later list books, she still to this day uses the website Does the Dog Die to determine if she's going to watch the movie, the show, or
I love that. I love that so much. I love the random websites that still exist. Like, is it Christmas.com? It only says yes one day a year, but you can't guess which one. But the thing with later lists is that later doesn't necessarily mean years down the line, right? Because, and this is a thing that I tell my kids when they are like, well, why can't I do this yet? Or why can so-and-so do this? Why can my sister do this? And I invite my kids to reflect. Think about how much you've grown in the last year. Yeah. Think about how much you've learned, how much you've changed. Think about 2 years ago. Think about 6 months ago, right? Because they're able to go, oh, yeah, there is a big difference. And that could be so helpful but why not? Well, here's this totally valid explanation, but I don't like that one. Okay, let's think, let's reflect. Use those critical thinking skills.
Here's the great thing about 21st century parenting is Rebellion 1776 is a later list book for your kid. But you can go to Taste Kid, you can go to Libby, you can go to a ton of different sites and go books like Rebellion 1776. And it'll generate whole lists for you that you can probably find something similar. Okay, we're not ready for Rebellion 1776, but we are super duper into American Revolution centric historical fiction. Let's see what we got. Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. We've got all these other books too. So, you know, America's First Daughter. Like, there's all of these other books.
I have an entire bookshelf of them. I have my nonfiction. My kid has her fiction. Yeah. And all we talk about is the American Revolution. Now, we're going to try not to spoil too much here in this episode about the book.
In Bibliophage, there will be spoilers, but they will always be spoiler warnings. So if you're still interested in reading a book we're discussing, you can skedaddle before we start talking about the parts you don't want to know about yet. But this isn't Bibliophage. This is still childproof. So we are going to purposefully avoid as many spoilers as we can while still being able to successfully discuss the book.
But before we discuss this book, let's discuss the other two podcasts. I feel that's like a good idea.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little story. Once upon a time, Tori, a complete nerd, avid reader, and history buff, had a kid who found Hamilton, the musical, and got obsessed. In a good way. Tori, a great parent, started answering questions this kid had about the American Revolution. But to do that, Tori had to learn about it. So they started reading books and making these trading cards of founding fathers. The ones we learn about in school, and even the cooler ones we don't, like Benjamin Rush. Tori found they liked the untold story of the founding of the United States and our bid for independence. Now, Tori is doing a whole podcast to tell the bits of our first revolution that get left out. Every week, Tori will sit me down and reteach me and you, the listener, about the founding of our country on Founded.
But that's not all, because Gwenna is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author who is an avid reader. Not just an avid reader, she devours books like they are food. A bookworm, a bibliophile, a bibliophage. That's probably part of what makes her such a good writer. Every good writer is a good reader. Even better, there's an audience for every book, and every author is someone's favorite. Gwenna routinely forces me to sit down and listen to her info dump about her latest literary obsession. What makes a book immersive? Why is the writing so good? How do the characters feel so real, even when they have wings? All the things that make us fall in love with a story, a series, or an author. So instead of just talking to me, she's going to talk to everyone. And still at me. This new podcast will give authors a chance to fangirl over their favorite authors, all with a spoiler-loving human who probably hasn't read these books but is excited to hear all about them. It's me. I actually love spoilers. I am the spoiler-loving human. So I hope you're hungry, book lovers. On the menu is Bibliophage.
The trailers for both Founded and Bibliophage dropped back on June 27th, so you can listen to those now pretty much everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Founded hits your podcast playlist on July 4th, because of course it lands July 4th.
Of course
and
it does.
a new episode will drop on Fridays.
And Bibliophage debuts on July 8th with new episodes every other Tuesday. And the best part is Childproof isn't going anywhere. You'll still get fresh episodes on how we're surviving and thriving as parents every Wednesday.
This is all part of our brand new podcast network, Pleasant Phantom Productions, and we aren't done building yet. There's more to come, but right now we're just going to embrace the 2 new podcasts we're debuting.
And be sure to subscribe to Founded and Bibliophage. Oh, also we have merch. Yeah,
that's a lot of.
Yeah, you can subscribe to Childproof too on YouTube and Spotify. Bonus stuff to keep your expectations low on that, okay?
All right, let's talk about the book about the American Revolution on Childproof.
Sounds good.
All right, so Rebellion 1776 is by Laurie Halse Anderson, and it's a view of Boston through the year 1776, as told from the point of view of a 13-year-old girl, Elspeth Culpepper, who was posing as a 16-year-old girl, working as a kitchen maid, first in the house of a British judge, so he was on the British side, and then for members of the rebellion after Boston was evacuated. She served through the Boston Smallpox outbreak and the inoculations, and describes life during confinement and town quarantine. Most of the book takes place in that section of time with the smallpox going on. No spoilers, but she basically got accidentally orphaned after the Loyalists were forced to evacuate Boston. A huge chunk of the story is her search for news of her lost father.
Yes, and I, from the beginning, love this book. But number one, every chapter has an actual historical quote before the chapter begins.
That was one of my favorite parts. It was just it made it so much more real to have this. No, real people names that we recognize, like Abigail Adams,
Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. And one of the things that I love too is because we're adults reading this. This is a middle grade book.
Yeah.
And so by
middle grade YA, it's right on that line. I want to be clear
really
there.
Is. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it because for a child reading this book, it is giving them more historical context. Whereas as adults reading it, we're like, oh, cool, they included this person. They included this quote. And so it really, I think, pulls a child into the fact that this is real history that we're writing this fictional story about. And immediately in this story, I was in love with how they wrote about the historical events that are happening without it being, like the nonfiction books that I read, because I was able to identify where we were in history. right? Because this story begins during the siege of Boston, and very quickly we turn into Dorchester Heights, which is where the historical moment here. I'm talking about the real thing now, not the book thing. It's better when I over explain it. So
the history books tend to really focus on stuff going on in Philadelphia and New York, but Boston was a cultural hub at this point. It was a major trading point for the British and had a ton of population. And in the Revolution,
Boston started the revolution.
A ton of stuff happened in Boston. We get to the Boston Tea Party, but after that happens, the history books forget about Boston. But Boston was so busy for the whole revolution.
And so that's Dorchester Heights. The end of the siege of Boston is where they secretly moved 2,000 troops, cannons, and artillery into position surrounding the city. They're like up on this hill so that you can see down, right? And fun fact, okay, those cannons that were there, they were stolen by Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys, right? They went to Fort Ticonderoga, they stole these cannons, and then Henry Knox brought the cannons and gunpowder to Boston. And more fun fact, Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen got into like a huge fight about who would lead to steal the cannons and take over Ticonderoga. Like they got a huge fight. They were like really petty about it.
I'm aware that Ethan Allen is just the human's name and that he was an important person in the... Are we talking about Ethan Allen? Was he a furniture maker before all the war stuff?
I don't think so. I know there is an Ethan Allen furniture brand
named Ethan Allen. They make couches. They're all right.
He and well, I feel like it's probably like Samuel Adams. That's we know of Samuel Adams as a beer, but that company has nothing to do with Samuel Adams and was started in the 80s. So, but Ethan Allen was
American
the head
Revolution
of the
beer. No, American Revolution couch. Probably not.
Right. So Benedict Arnold, right? You've heard of him.
Right. He was the big traitor who actually...
Yeah, I'm a Benedict Arnold sympathizer. We'll get into that Unfounded. But
we're going to leave that completely uncontextualized.
I'm not
You're going to have to go listen to Founded
context
to understand.
He was this decorated general, right? Like he was really big, right? And then Ethan Allen had to petition the Continental Congress to even have the Green Mountain Boys recognized as an official American army. Okay. And so the two
I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
That's okay. That's okay. Stick with me because we're getting to the petty part that I'm excited to tell you about. So Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys, that's his militia. They team up with Benedict Arnold to go take over Fort Ticonderoga, steal some cannons. Okay. Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, they're getting into it. They're like having this petty argument the whole way. No, I'm going to lead them. No, I'm going to lead them. I'm the leader here. No, I'm the right. So Ethan Allen, though, his militia are very loyal to him. And he basically toddler tantrums, puts his feet in the mud and is like, well, we're not going if I'm not the leader. And Benedict Arnold is like, no, like we should let them choose. And they're all like, we choose Ethan. And so... just another moment where
playground fits that these boys threw
Yeah.
while establishing a whole new country, breaking away from the largest military presence in the world.
And they're just, I want to be in charge.
I want to be in charge.
I'm in charge of this.
My mom said I could be in charge.
Yeah. And
So my dad.
that is the historical context to the moment where we're at in this book.
Yeah. So the entire story of Rebellion 1776 is based heavily on the letters sent by Abigail Adams, who was John Adams' wife, President John Adams.
And mother of John Quincy Adams, who was another president.
Also a president. She traveled to Boston in 1776 specifically for the smallpox inoculations. All the characters in the book, near as we can tell, are completely made up. It's historical fiction, so Laurie just inserted these imaginary people into very real happenings. And she got a lot of information of what it was like in the house, what it was like to deal with inoculations, and we'll talk about that here in just a sec. But she wrote all of that because Abigail Adams was This is in no way founded. I have done no research on this, but Abigail Adams, I think, was as verbose and obsessed with letter writing as Hamilton and Jefferson, and we have so many letters of these. Abigail Adams spent most of her life pregnant and with a quill in her hand.
Jefferson and Abigail Adams got into a huge letter fight once. And then for posterity, after it happened, John Adams had put a note into her letter book that she kept that said, I didn't know they had this argument. So everyone knows I didn't know what's happening. And I love that. But yeah, so Laurie Halse Anderson, she read a lot of the letters between John and Abigail, and from the Massachusetts Historical Society, she learned a whole lot about what the actual ordinary people were doing. And so then she created these characters that exist in this world. And it's like name dropping the historical figures. And I love that.
A ton.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the inoculations, and I feel like it's important to note, if you don't know about smallpox and inoculations are not the same as vaccines.
No.
In 1776, it basically consisted of, this is a little ew, but they would take the
factor.
They would take the liquid from
infected material,
the infected liquid material from someone's pock, and then they would create a wound on a new person and run that liquid through it, because it would give you smallpox, but it would be in a controlled way where you were way more likely to survive.
You're right. It would be what they called a mild case. A mild case is still serious.
Very serious.
In the book, they even discuss, because one of the characters has enormous reservations about her family getting inoculated. Gee, that sounds familiar. So she, and this was super, super common in this point for the Boston inoculations, which, by the way, a lot of those inoculations were recommended and highly touted by my favorite founding father, who was oft forgotten, Benjamin Rush, who was not in this book at all.
I was shocked.
Laurie.
I was waiting for it the entire time. I was like, at least a Rush quote. Nothing.
Benjamin Rush really, really, really pushed for these inoculations, because smallpox, when it's gotten the regular way, a standard infection, could be a mild case. It could be.
I want to say 1 in 3 died.
Yeah. A horrific experience. And it's not an easy, quick death. It is a slow, rot death.
Getting smallpox via the vaccine, or I said vaccine, inoculation. They're different things. You would still get sick for weeks. And that is in this book. They are accurately describing this whole process and also what it was like in quarantine. They had to quarantine the town.
Right. But with the inoculations, we're looking more at 1 in 10 were dying from the inoculation version.
And even less as they continue through it.
They got better about it. So inoculations are not vaccines. We're going to let you Google what the difference between inoculations, immunizations, and vaccines are.
Yeah.
They're slightly different things, but that is described. There's a lot of talk of smallpox in the book, because in Boston in 1776, there was a lot of talk of smallpox.
It was all over. Yeah. And it was a huge risk to the British troops who were coming to fight. It was a huge risk to the Continental Army. It was a huge risk to the everyday folk.
Yeah.
And it was oftentimes, even with their reservations, we have to do these inoculations because otherwise we don't know how many people make it out of here.
So what happened in the book, as in real life, is right before they finally announced, okay, we're going to be giving inoculations in order to keep everything spread. Because remember, inoculations still give you smallpox. It's just a mild case of smallpox. So you still have to quarantine. But what they decided to do is, instead of quarantining like they did when you got a real case of smallpox, where your whole house was locked down and they'd hang a flag from out there so everyone knew that your house was infected, they just locked down the whole city. They're like, listen, if you want to have the inoculations, you get yourself to Boston. We'll lance you. We'll goo you up. You'll get nice and sick for several weeks, and then you can go home to your regular life knowing that you are now immune from smallpox for the rest of ever.
Yeah.
So in the book and in real life, there was this massive migration in two directions. A bunch of people who were frightened of the inoculations, who were frightened of getting any version of smallpox, because you could still die from the inoculation. They left Boston. The people who wanted it, like Abigail Adams and her family, they moved. They came to Boston for several weeks.
Yeah, and I love the historical context and the way that it was talked about in a way that a middle grader can read it. Yes. And even there are parts where the narrator of our book, Elsbeth, is like, "Dear reader, sorry, I'm sorry to describe this in such a way." Like it I feel like it makes it that more personal. You could be friends with this kid if you were a kid.
There was this one little spot right toward the beginning where, so Elsbeth is a lower class citizen. Her father was a sailmaker and she was working as a maid. I don't want to give too much more information.
And we're not going to tell you about the rest of her family. You'd have to read the book. Yeah.
Right. So, but this is a very like typical upstairs, downstairs, Downton Abbey style depiction of the class divide. And at one point, Elsbeth refers to a character who is higher in the class order than she was. He was born to money. He was studying to be a doctor. She was born poor AF and a kitchen maid, which if you know anything about maid orders, a kitchen maid is just about the lowest, a chamber pot maid or a hearth maid. We're a little lower than that, but kitchen maids, not high in the ranking here. She looked at this boy who was probably 17 or 18, who was studying to become a doctor. And she referred to him by his first name and then said, "Dear reader, I apologize for using his first name. Here's some reasons. I promise you that when I was in his presence, I respectfully called him Mr. I forget what his last name is, but I respectfully called him as I should because I remember my place." It was just this little tiny spot. And I was like, oh, that was cool.
Yeah, because it really, it breaks the fourth wall in that way of bringing you into the story more.
Yeah.
And in that way of providing the historical context without, textbook. Yeah. In this time period, this was the social order. It just, you become part of it. You start to see it for yourself.
And it's routinely referred to as an adult reading it. There were like, okay, I get that you are a lower class citizen, but remembering who it was written for, no, it makes sense to constantly have to, we're not actually all on level playing field here. Not everyone is on equal footing. Some people have way more access and
John Adams wrote so much about that. And I'm so excited to talk about that Unfounded, just so you know. I will totally derail the whole podcast right now if I start talking about the social order and John Adams.
I studied when I went to school for history. I didn't finish, but I went to school for history. And I studied something in particular called socialist history, which means I would study a particular time period, but I really, really went digging for socialist records, not the history of socialism.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
That's an idea, and that's not what I'm talking about. Socialist history is history as experienced by the common folk, the day-to-day experiences of normal people that give a different perspective. Rebellion 1776 was a really refreshing take because so much of historical fiction is typically told from the rulers or the rebel leaders or the upper crust who are less immediately impacted by the loss of, say, onions. That's a part of this story, is at some point she's desperately needing onions for the best reason ever that we will also get to. She desperately needs onions and cannot find them. No one can find them. People are breaking into other people's houses after onions.
Yeah.
She's out here describing trying to keep chickens happy and laying because it turns out cannon fire stresses birds out and stressed birds don't lay eggs.
Yeah. And that's a thing I really like too with this is here is this girl who is 13 pretending to be 16 and she's trying to keep her chickens happy and she's made friends with her cow. And I really love that.
It's such a
Because
13-year-old girl thing to do.
Yes, and because I think that's how this works so well.
Not
As
exclusively a 13-year-old. If you're 37,
I would love
I make
to
friends with my cows. I know, we
I
know.
want to make friends with the cow desperately. I don't have a cow. It's so disappointing.
There's one across the street from me if you want to borrow. It's not mine, but it.
Thanks. That's so helpful right now. But I like that because it is such a moment of connection for a child reading about a historical time, because it can feel so out of touch to look at the times, even for adults to look at these times hundreds of years ago and feel, I have no connection with these people.
Yeah.
We live in different worlds. We live in the same world at a different time, and we still have these connections with them. And so I loved whenever we were talking to a cow in the book.
Yeah.
Like, I loved it. And
I do appreciate that Anderson, not only did she cherry pick and drop a lot of great real history into this, because again, she included the reading of the Declaration of Independence. And I went back and I looked it up. She included the reading of that letter to the public of Boston on the correct date.
and it was the correct person.
It was the correct person that read it?
Yeah, Sheriff Greenleaf was a real person who was also on the committees of correspondence. And but it wasn't just Sheriff Greenleaf who was standing beside him, but John Quincy Adams.
Yeah.
And William Cranch, who you haven't heard of, but we'll get to
haven't
him
heard of.
unfounded. That's fine. But there was a lot of historical figures mentioned, and it was just in this passing way, like you would talk about a celebrity, of which I totally know modern day celebrity names. I know so many. Tell me, what's a celebrity that people talk about, please?
Sabrina Carpenter.
So it's like if someone just casually was like talking about like Sabrina Carpenter is like coming to our town. Wow, that's wild. Like that's how they're mentioning these historical figures, because it was exciting.
Yeah.
It was an exciting thing. And so Sheriff Greenleaf, though, fun fact about him, his sister married Noah Webster.
Noah Webster Dictionary Man?
Yeah, like,
Noah Webster?
like the Noah Webster of Dictionary Man.
No,
yeah.
I love this crossover.
Yeah.
Because Webster, I like Webster.
Yeah. And so here's,
Dictionaries are my friends.
I did keep a list of historical figures that I thought was like exciting that they actually brought up, because I really like lists. And so James Lovell, he is mentioned in this, and I love the reaction of the different characters in the book to hearing, because some of the people know who he is. And then, you know, like our Elsbeth, well, she doesn't know because she's not
Right.
as privy to getting the knowledge, right?
Right.
And so James Lovell, his significant accomplishments, he was a spy, but what he really was good at was ciphering codes. And because of that skill of his, he was able to let Washington know what Sir Henry Clinton and Cornwallis were up to, which allowed him to take Yorktown. So
you mentioned spies. There's a lot of mention of spies, and it was actually one of my favorite scenes in the book. No spoilers, but a committee comes up, and their whole job, and these were committees that were all over the place.
committees of correspondence.
Their whole
It sounds
job.
boring on purpose. We'll get to that on Unfounded. Okay, go.
If you're not watching this on
Started
video,
by Samuel Adams.
if you're not watching this on video, if you're in audio, you should probably just go check out YouTube or Spotify just to watch Tori get real excited in motion. So at one point, all of these committees of correspondence are brought up, and they are speaking. And one of them looks at the other one and go, "Can you agree that people in this town are using us for their petty disagreements and vengeance? And this is probably a waste of a lot of our time."
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite parts of the book, was just there was a level of self-awareness of people will be petty, and we have just given them a weapon to be petty with.
Yeah.
And we should probably stop this.
Yeah. And that's, you know, the whole founded thing is I want to tell you all the pettiness that existed in the nonfiction versions of these things. Okay.
I'll tell you what, we have behind the scenes info. We have already recorded several episodes of Founded as we are recording this episode, which means I have a little bit more context than I would have prior to recording those episodes. And the amount, when we look at our modern political leaders and go, oh my gosh, how are you this dumb? Just know this is not new.
Yeah, this is it's the
Not
American
new.
way. Okay.
Now, I will say the history was immersive enough.
Yeah.
I tend to get finicky with historical details when I know them.
Yeah.
You show me a Tudor era show and I'm like, that ruff was wrong. No,
Yeah.
boys did not wear those ruffs. What the? I'm not as familiar with 18th century customs, fashions, practices. I know enough that nothing in Laurie's story pulled me out of it for me to go, wait, how?
Yeah.
Anything that seemed slightly, Laurie really sort of like dialed in how much explanation and how much just casual mention.
That's really what I love too, is when you're reading it, if you are familiar and maybe read like several biographies and history books a week, then you're like, oh, I totally know what you're talking
and if you
about
don't,
here.
you should subscribe to Founded because Tori will do that for you.
I read the book so you don't have to. So that's one of the things I really enjoyed, is that if you are privy to the knowledge, you can connect the dots. And if you are not, the dots don't need to be connected.
Yeah.
Like in the beginning of the book, there are two characters. I actually, before we sat down, I went to my wall. And so if you are watching this, you will now see that I am holding up some of my trading cards. Because these are two people that are mentioned towards the beginning of the book that I was excited to hear their actual names. And one of them is Benjamin Church, who was a very early trader, very early on. He was spying for both the British and the Patriots. He was giving them both intel on each other. Yeah, it didn't end well for him. Really. And then the other one was James Warren, who was a doctor who died at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so we are introduced to a character who had apprenticed under Dr. James Warren, but he was afraid to say so because, and that's what I love too, is that people didn't know who they could tell what side they're on. Because it could be that now you're considered a spy, and people were wild back then in how they handled those things.
Well, and there's a lot of social convention that's described, not just how the lower class acted, but how the upper class acted with one another.
Yes.
Like they were shunned for being, for not handling their debts properly. They were shunned for not dressing their servants nicely enough.
Yeah.
They were shunned for, there's an entire scene in the book where one of the upper class characters looks at our main character Elspeth and goes, leave me alone with this guy for an hour. And Elspeth is like full pearl clutching. I can't do that.
That's going to look bad on me and a family and you, and we can't do it that way.
There's a lot.
Yeah. And it also shows the problems that were existing in a family because of what was happening around them, right? Like they are discussing, should we get inoculated? They are discussing, wait, independence. I've always been on the Patriots side, but like, I never thought that we could be a country.
Right. Like,
and
what does be a country mean from the ground?
And like, we don't know anything besides monarchy. So do we install a new president? Like these are real conversations that were happening.
Because the book takes place with children, they at one point have the children have an entire discussion of, well, who's going to be our king? Well, what if we don't have a king? Oh, we have to have a king.
Yeah. What do you mean no king? We have to.
I mean, keep in mind, democracy at this point, they're like, well, we could have
a parliament. A concept.
No, that would never work. Democracy was a concept from the ancient Greeks. It really had not been successfully applied to anything more than a village or
and it
town.
Was during the Enlightenment period, which I'll talk more about on Founded, but they were taking things and concepts from like John Locke. They were these ideals of what a government could be, but hadn't been.
Making stuff up in this period, okay?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Speaking of making things up.
Some of it was great, and some of it...
we missed. Speaking of making things up, though, Laurie, because so much of this book takes place during the smallpox events, there was first an infection and then the quarantine because of the inoculations. When we say that they were inoculating people for smallpox in Boston in 1776, that makes it sound like we had figured some stuff out about modern medicine and germ theory. No. And Laurie spends a good amount of time just sort of dumping out that very middle ground of 18th century medicine.
Like we're hearing the conversations the doctors are having. Yeah. And my favorite was when we actually got to hear about the four humors.
The four humors, yep.
But when they're described to us, it's more like the four temperaments. Like they're kind of
humors and temperaments just sort of get crossed.
Yes,
in the words,
and this happened a lot.
Something different.
Yes, they're technically something different. Neither of them actually have any medical or scientific basis.
Right. None of them are real, to be fair. But in the 18th century, they fully bought into this.
Our four temperaments and our four humors are as follows: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And then in the more scientifical version of this, right, we have melancholic, sanguine, choleric, and phlegmatic. And so we're looking at our biles that could be black or yellow, our blood and our phlegm. And mind you, at the time, the number one treatment for most things, no matter what, was bloodletting.
Yeah. And that's where you've heard things are too hot. Well, that's because some illnesses were hot illnesses. And so the solution to solving that was just to make you cold, which was almost never the answer.
Every illness at the time. And of course, I have more research to do in this. I have a to be read about medicine during this time. Yeah. But from a recent read of Benjamin Rush biography, everything was called a fever. It didn't matter what the sickness was because they couldn't identify germs or viruses or bacteria. If you were sick, you had a fever. Now, sometimes they would give it a name like yellow fever, which caused jaundice and made you yellow. That one, they had to call that one a specific thing because it was different. And much like smallpox, what a creative name. They didn't identify that bacteria that caused that until much, much, much later because it was just,
if you don't know,
that disease.
Pox, it's really just a pimple-like mark. Sometimes it's a boil, sometimes it's filled with pus, sometimes it's just filled with blood or ew. And the reason we called it smallpox is because the chicken pox, it looked like chicken pecks because they were very, very tiny blisters. Smallpox.
Really? I didn't know that one.
Yeah, that's where we got the name chicken pox, is because they look like a chicken pecked you. Smallpox were small poxes, but they could cluster up, which chicken pox don't tend to cluster. Smallpox would cluster. And we didn't have like a large pox, but we had several other pox diseases, and they would make these huge blisters all over you. And that's how we got smallpox as a name, because the pox they gave you were small. We were not good at naming things.
Well, we weren't good at treating anything either, to be fair. No.
I did like, because it wasn't uncommon. The 18th century being the Enlightenment period, a lot of people were more and more accessing learned material. And so in the book, one of the doctors offers to bleed one of the adult characters. And the adult character, who's very sick with smallpox because she's been inoculated, comes to just long enough to go, no. I like my blood where it is. Leave it alone. Honestly, the number of times that a patient in real life and in the book rejecting bloodletting is what saved their life.
Yes. Bloodletting, people were very at ends with that idea too. During this time, and some people swore by it, like our buddy Benjamin Rush. He just really believed that it just
really
was
bad
so
blood.
Good for everyone.
Really bad blood.
But at the same time, they also thought that boiling vinegar, it could clean the air and make us all breathe better by breathing in vinegar steam.
Well, and I mentioned earlier the onions thing. Part of the reason the onions were so important. Have you ever seen the videos on the internet where someone's like, put an onion on your baby's foot and it makes them better? So this goes way far back in history.
Yeah.
We've been obsessed with the healing properties of onions. Here's the thing. Onions really do have healing properties and really good things for us.
Yeah. They're not going to fix smallpox, but
they're not going to fix smallpox. But part of the reason onions came up is because at this time, the bloodletting was super important. The most important medicines they had, the only medicines they had at this time were poultices and decoctions.
Yes. And we do get to experience in this book going to an apothecary and witnessing from a child's point of view how these things are put together and what the instructions are.
Yeah. And some of them were insane. Like
Yeah.
to my modern brain, they sound insane. What do you mean you have to, under a sunny day after having ingested sugar, rub this on their left knee? Sir, they have a headache. What is this going to do for a headache? But they were trying. They were trying. And here's the thing: is some of these poultices and decoctions, they were real medicine. They would, anytime you read a book where they're boiling willow bark, they're making aspirin. Mm-hmm. That's essentially what they were doing.
That's a thing that I've learned a lot of too when we're talking about like historical medicine. Sometimes they were accidentally right.
They were
they didn't have precisely
the right
data
it
to
worked,
prove it.
Just that it did.
And sometimes they couldn't prove that it worked better than the thing that definitely didn't work.
Yeah.
But that is a thing that I really enjoyed too in this, was that we do witness someone taking data.
Yeah.
And trying to do science about things. And that's...
Now it's a kid, so it's logged in a very kid fashion.
Yes.
And then that kid also ends up having to leave off because, well, that kid got inoculated too. But...
Right. And that's a lot of the medicine things back then, right? I mean, someone suggested wash your hands and went to prison, right? Like that's the germ theory was like widely rejected at first, and that wasn't even at this time.
Well, yeah,
later
we
on.
didn't get germ theory until nearly the 20th century.
Yeah, and that is, I'm going to talk about Benjamin Rush again. Yeah. It's so surprising.
You'll note in Founded, we actually have a running bit of information of how far into a history book can Tori get before the mouthiest, gossipiest, most tea-spilling bastard of the American Revolution gets dropped into the source text, because he ran his mouth a lot about everything.
No, literally, people would tell him things when they wanted someone else to know it because they knew that he would share it. They knew he couldn't help himself. So if you just mentioned it to Benjamin Rush, other people were going to hear it, and the person you want to hear
they
it.
absolutely knew
why
what
send
that
a
kettle
letter?
was going to whistle. They would tell it,
Why?
knowing it would spill its tea.
Why send a letter when I could just tell Benjamin Rush? But
everyone will know way faster.
He and we all know someone like that too, I think. You know. So, but one of the things that he wrote about medicine at that time, because there was a kind of revolutionary medicine change happening. Mm-hmm. But it was in the consideration in this generational divide of doctors of trying to determine the point of medicine. Is our job to fight nature or to help people along through nature? Meaning, should we be intervening and playing God and saving people's lives when they're clearly so sick, or should we be making them comfortable and being human with them? And this was like a hugely debated thing at this time, because they were trying to figure out what a doctor's job should actually be.
Right.
Which is fascinating. But
fascinating.
Like, what should we do? Stop bloodletting people? How about that's the conversation?
Right. Don't feed them. Please remove that plaster from their forehead. It is not helping, and I'm pretty sure you've put carbolic acid in it. We don't need just going to break them out.
Yeah, we don't need to do that. A lot of treatments were just like, we're just going to cause you pain. You will forget you're sick.
Right. Right. My dad used to make that joke all the time when I'd fall over and I'd skin my knee. You go, well, come here. Let me take the hammer to the other one. Then that scrape won't hurt so bad. I don't think that was helpful.
No, I don't think so either.
So Rebellion 1776, I would say, is super, super appropriate for middle school and high school.
Maybe fifth graders. Maybe.
Yeah.
Depending on the kid.
There are some disturbing themes. There are on-page deaths. There is on-page description of bodily fluids and people in various stages of sickness. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple tense scenes that might be tough for middle grade or below. It depends on your kiddo.
Yes.
There is some violence against a child on page. Mm-hmm. So if that's something that's, it's not grotesque, it's not gory, and it is handled very graciously, but it's still there. Mm-hmm. So if that's something that's going to be a struggle, maybe later list that one. Middle school me would have gobbled this up.
I probably would have read this in the 4th or 5th grade myself, but also I could handle more serious things because my life was more serious. I'm just gonna just real quick.
I would have hit here probably around 13, 14. Okay. So minor spoiler alert. I did promise no major spoilers. There's a minor spoiler. When you listen to Bibliophage, like I said, we'll have spoilers and this sound will play before I dump a spoiler on you. Now,
An actual spoiler alert. I love it. It's an alert.
Now, toward the end of the book, Elspeth, our main character, finds her courage and tells the family she'd been serving through 1776 that she wanted to find her own way and not stay in a life of servitude. And I was so excited that Laurie sort of included this idea that there was a serving class.
And a radical idea at the time, especially for a girl.
Right. Elspeth wanted to be a seamstress, and she wanted to be what was referred to then and in the book as a she merchant, a woman business owner. I need you to know how incredibly rare that was. In the United States, women couldn't have credit cards until the 1970s. This is the 1770s.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was often like widows.
Right. That wasn't a small ask, especially for a girl at Elspeth Station. For me, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old Gwenna, I would have bodied that.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
You just told grown-ups to suck it. You're going to live your life your way. Woo!
Yeah. No, I would have loved the whole thing. But I also was reading historical fiction as a kid. I read this series, Dear America series, and it was kind of written as diary entries of these different events, including the American Revolution. Like, I have reasons for having founded now, as you know, like now. But like, I've always been a history nerd and a nerd. I'm multi-classed. But it does,
same.
to me, as an adult with discernment, I would agree with your judgment of more middle school, definitely high school. It is on that line of middle grade.
It is a good book. I need you to know. I like the book. It's just, if you're going to choose to read it based off our recommendation, it helps me to reset my audience, because there are times that things feel a little over-explained until you remember, a 13-year-old wouldn't have any frame of reference for any of this.
And to parents who are parents of history buff kids, if your kid is younger than what we are describing, I think this would be a good book to read with them.
Yeah.
As long as I would read it first, though, because then you know when to prepare them. I don't know about anyone else. I am a book notator. We'll have to talk about that on Bibliophage.
We'll have to talk about that on Bibliophage, because I have some thoughts about annotations and books and note-taking and when it needs to.
Yeah, we'll get to
that's
that.
An entire episode of Bibliophage all into itself.
But I would read. I think it would be okay to read with a 4th or 5th grader.
Yeah.
But with
I would agree. Now, keep in mind, anytime we're recommending age ranges, either on Founded or mostly on Bibliophage, we are going for a super duper average. I was a gifted and talented kid with undiagnosed ADHD. I was hyperlexic in that I could read by 4. I was reading Michael Crichton by 3rd grade. Okay.
Yeah, same.
I could have
The
handled
Hobbit
this
in the 4th grade.
I read Jane Eyre in 5th. Like, I don't even like Jane Eyre. Didn't like it then. I've read it now as an adult. Still didn't like it. You don't have to read the classics to be a good reader.
You don't have to read the classics. That's going to be a whole episode on
That's going to be a whole episode on Bibliophage too. So, this is one of those books that, had I not had the foreknowledge of, this is more for kids, I don't think I would have finished the book, because it's for kids. And my adult brain kept going, move on. No, we got to explain it for a 13-year-old.
Right.
Okay.
And it's not, when we say for kids, it is important to note that kids are still 13, 14-year-olds. They are much older kids. We are moving into young adult.
Right.
But it is written in a way that you can digest it at a younger level.
But again, when we say what the age ranges are, we're going on super averages. You should probably pre-read this book if you've got a kid who's an early reader, who's already reading some probably big kid heady stuff. We're speaking in generalities. So if we keep saying, oh, it's for a 4th grader and you pre-read the book, and well, my 2nd grader could, great. Your 2nd grader
awesome.
can handle this.
Yes.
Excellent.
That's
We're not
good.
saying you shouldn't show it to kids younger than this. We're just saying
Based
on average,
on our discernment,
yes,
that's what we would
this
probably
book is
think
later
about.
listed until at least 4th or 5th grade, based not just on the scenarios, but the vocabulary tends to get a little, she does use historical terminology. She defines it when necessary, but it means that those words are not just big, but they're super foreign and they're not in the regular vernacular.
Right.
So like we don't say those words every day. You might not, it's definitely going to be one of those things. If you hand this to your 4th grader to read, there's going to be at least 3 words that they will not know how to pronounce because they've only read them. And they may or may not get it right.
That happens in my house just in general because all of us read so much.
Yes.
And then you say a word and you're like, wait, can you spell that? I don't know I don't know that word, but it might just be because you read it and you haven't said it yet.
Mine was naive. Naive is how I pronounced that for most of my life. I was deep into adulthood when I first really, because I knew the term naive. Yeah. I just didn't know how to spell it.
Yeah,
I did, but I thought you said it naive.
That is what I love about today's world and why I am jealous of our children's generations is to this day, because I still read a lot more than I talk to people. If I go to use a word, I'm like, I'm going to go look up how to pronounce this. I don't have to ask anyone. I can just look it up.
Okay, so Tori, was that really fun? Did we do a good crossover episode together?
I think we did. I was just like thinking, I'm like, do we just end a conversation when we're done? Like, how do we do this? We've been using a timer for.
There's a reason we use a timer. Thank you so much for listening to this super duper special crossover episode of Childproof, Founded, and Bibliophage. We want to hear from you. For right now, our email is still childproofmail@gmail.com. When you subscribe and listen to our episodes on Founded, when episode 1 drops, we will give you the rest of the emails if you would like to contact us about those specific podcasts. But for right now, you can send whatever questions, suggestions, or ideas you want to childproofmail@gmail.com.
And be sure to give us a like, subscribe, go check out the trailers for Founded and Bibliophage and subscribe there too. We are so excited to share this stuff with you guys and turn on notifications on YouTube, Spotify, all the places. You know the drill.
Yep. Whether you listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or any of the other streaming services, leave us a rating, especially on Founded and Bibliophage. If you are still listening to us at this point, please, please, please go rate Founded and Bibliophage because you probably already rated Childproof and you're just tired of us begging you to do it.
Right. But you're not tired of us talking if you're still here while we're ending the show. But so be sure to check out Founded.
And Bibliophage.
And it's just us talking more at each other. So come along for the ride. We will link both of those in the show description.
And remember, sometimes our kids are the assholes.
And sometimes it's us.
It's almost always Benjamin Rush. He is so petty. I love him.
But like in a good way.
Yeah,
Usually.
like an adorable.
He's had some big misses too.
It's an adorable asshole.
Yeah.
That's what she said.